This episode is brought to you by Padaris, empowering transport planners everywhere. See padaris.com/podcast for details. Today's podcast guest experience begins in April 1990 as a student site engineer with Balfour Beatty in Dartford. Sounds like some widening experience in M25 down there to me. Then on to Sir Owen Williams and Partners, of course known for the original Wembley Stadium. And of course, Gravelly Hill, or Spaghetti Junction as we know it, then absorbed and acquired by AMB, of course, back in 2006. Over the 2 years at Birmingham City Council, your first job as a graduate engineer takes your career to 1994, followed by Halgrove Fox, then a transport planner at SBA in 1998. A principal consultant role follows next at Jacobs up to March 2004, a short stint at Buchanan's until August 2005, when you then joined and helped grow Ardent Consulting Engineers, grow some 18 odd years ago. At what level was that, Matthew? Was that principal?
I actually joined as a technical director before joining the board a couple of years later.
Technical director, I do apologise. Ardent, of course, currently shortlisted the NCE SME Consulting Firm of the Year and Best Place to Work award for an SME consulting firm. I don't normally plug firms here, but credit where it's due and best of luck with those awards. Snooker and mandolin player Matthew Last, Transport Director at Ardent Consulting Engineers. Welcome to the show. What have I missed?
Well, that's a very good synopsis there, really. Yes, so interesting. Interesting background in my career. As you started out, as you say, yes, site on the A282 while the Dartford Bridge, Q2 Bridge, was being built. Because I did a thin sandwich degree, and that was a first placement. And I did a second one with Williams, as you mentioned, working on the Sheffield Super Tram, and actually designed a retaining wall when I was still a student that actually got built, and is still standing as far as I'm aware. That's always a bonus.
We did something right.
And then I joined Birmingham City Council on a graduate training scheme, which is good because I got exposure to. I started off in drainage, doing drainage modelling actually rather than transport modelling, but that stood me in good stead because some new software had come out, and sort of taught myself to use that. I was very grateful to have an opportunity. 1992, it was a recession. It was quite a bleak time. There weren't many opportunities, so I was glad to get something and get my teeth into it and
quite right.
Learn some new software. And before long, other people have been there some time were asking me questions about it. And then I moved on to doing highway design at Birmingham, and then transport planning, the division that was my third stint there. And then after that, I sort of decided that's what I wanted to do, really, move away from civil engineering into transport planning. And that was quite a good time, really, because things were starting to change away from the old prediction to provide car-orientated emphasis of transport into looking at access by other modes, walking, cycling, public transport. So that was quite a timely move. And then when I was seconded, I joined Halgrove Fox, I should say, in Birmingham there. I worked with Phil Jones, who's of course of PJA fame and one of the authors.
Everyone knows Phil Jones.
Everyone knows. Yeah, I think you're right. Everyone does know Phil Jones. Yes, I was one of his protégés, perhaps. So it was a good time to specialise in transport planning. So I did a stint there doing all sorts of things: bus priority studies, traffic calming, accident studies. Did a review of the residence parking scheme Stratford-upon-Avon, which led to an article I wrote being published in Parking Review. I don't know if that's still going. It's a recommended read. I've still got the article. And then I got seconded to work on rail-link engineering. Again, still through Halgrove, and on the Channel Tunnel Rail Link, High Speed 1, it's now better known. But to work on Stratford International Station. Then joined SBA as they were, and doing a lot of development work, mainly retail schemes, a lot of Sainsbury's stores, the one next to the underground at Loughton, where we had designed a bus and taxi interchange there for the station next to the store. And then, as you said, a stint at Jacobs. And then I moved to Buchanan Consulting Engineers in 2004, 2003, I think, was it 4? And then joined Ardent.
And never looked back.
Maybe 18 years later, exactly. Yes, doing a lot of work mainly on residential schemes now to London, South East. So it's been interesting. Interesting interesting journey.
Interesting, and a very fine work history, and would make an excellent CV, by the way. Let's go all the way back there, some plus 30 years. I don't want to give your age away, a gentleman never tells, but you did study civil engineering at Aston Uni, I think, 1988. Where did you believe your career was heading when you finished in those early 90s? I mean, it seems to have mapped out absolutely fine, but did you had an idea? Did you sort of know back then where you were heading?
Oh no, I had no plan at all really at that time. I had been interested in sort of highways, highway design. I probably thought that's probably where it would go. That was probably my main interest in civil engineering. I was less interested in the sort of traditional civil engineering subjects like structures and geotechnics and fluids, and more into the more peripheral subjects like things like cost-benefit analysis, environmental impact, the planning process. That was sort of more my interest, and I did a final year option in highways and traffic engineering and transport modelling. So I was quite interested in that, but I didn't really know about transport planning as an option back then. And obviously, I did a graduate training scheme, which gave me exposure to various different areas, and it sort of fed into transport planning, as many people do. I think I certainly did back then. So, this is interesting. I want to do more of this.
I'm not sure when transport planning kind of separated. Wasn't transport planning really kind of under the umbrella of civil engineering, let's call it, back in the day? And was it about 15, 20 years ago, as early as that, it kind of it split away and became its own sector, I'm guessing, due to the development growth in the UK?
It's probably about that sort of time, I would guess, about 30 years ago, when there was, as I said earlier, there was a change in the emphasis, moving away from just being very car dominated and catering for projected traffic flows in some future year during the weekday peak hours, and looking really more at a different approach, and realising we couldn't build our way out and keep widening roads and demolishing huge numbers of houses, and that had to be a different approach. So I think that's probably when it came about, and it was, as you said, originally a sort of subset of civil engineering, and after that it probably became broader and had a different intake to people from different backgrounds, not civil engineering, from more geography and other specialist subjects, a bit more of a varied than have been the case in the past. It was very much engineering dominated and very much about cars and roads.
Were you ambitious then when you left university, kind of full of determination to change the world? Did you see things kind of different? What was your vision as you left?
I don't think I really had any sort of vision then. I just wanted to sort of apply myself and learn, and I suppose find my niche as well. At the time, obviously you don't know what your niche is, because you don't know what the options are out there yet. So I think that was one. I was glad to have a job in the early 90s when there was a recession, and I suppose to show what I could do and get my head down and apply myself and learn the tools of the trade and master what I did. I certainly had no grand plan when I left university as to where I wanted to go, and I think certainly, I don't think at that time it would have been transport planning, because it's not really something I knew about.
No. But what was there an influence, or who was the influence back in the days? Was it a teacher or a mentor? Did your mother or father study engineering? Is it in the family at all? I mean, why civil engineering at all?
Well, in terms of family, I mean, my father was a railway signalman, working signal boxes on the East Coast main line out of King's Cross. And at the time, this is the 1970s, I'm talking about, the 1980s, there was a lot of improvement work going on back then to sort of increase line speeds and increase capacity. And so there was obviously civil engineering work going on in that I was aware of through his work. So I suppose that was part of it. My maternal grandfather was founder of a building firm that's still going today, based outside Ipswich. And at school, I was always interested in maths and physics and geography. So I suppose sort of engineering and probably civil engineering was probably a logical to study. And I said my younger brother was actually he studied electronic engineering, and he now works for Rolls-Royce doing aircraft engines. So So there's a sort of a link there, I suppose, as well.
It runs in the family, clearly, doesn't it? Yeah, runs in the family.
In a different way. But
Yeah.
but there probably is some sort of family link there, I think, yeah.
Some gene that's been passed down. Matthew, I'm a huge believer that success leaves clues. People who succeed, like yourself at the highest level, are doing something different than everyone else. In fact, the purpose of this podcast, as the intro states, the podcast bring you real world insights and valuable wisdom from people like, well, you. So let me ease you in gently with the current view of development planning. Is it all still making sense out there? Give us an insight or an idea of a few biggest frustrations daily and how you deal with them, as well as Ardent as a company.
Well, a key frustration at the moment in sort of the world of development planning which we operate in is the length of time it takes to get anything to be approved in fairly modest schemes, partly because of under-resourced local authorities, and also there's an awful lot of local opposition. Anything that generates any more traffic, or was perceived to generate any more traffic, and it's often massively overstated that local residents will say every household will have at least 2 cars and they will all leave home simultaneously at 8 o'clock, all of them, which is also nonsense, but that's what people seem to think. So you do get this sustained opposition, and that makes things difficult. And obviously it's very topical at the moment with things like in London with ULEZ being expanded and the low traffic neighbourhoods. So you can see that traffic's still a very emotive issue, and so that always seems to in any planning application, traffic and highways is always one of the big issues that is always contentious, and people always want to vent their frustrations about all existing problems, and that it gets very, very political, and it sort of slows everything down. But we do have some clients, one that does believe in extensive community engagement, finding out what problems are in the local community and trying to offer solutions. And we had a scheme which we worked on a few years ago, which it's being built out now. Actually, it's well advanced and selling very well, I understand, houses, where they spoke to a local school because they had the opportunity of providing a new drop-off car park at the rear of the school within the development, which is then used, I think, about community centre at the weekends and put school drop-off during term time, just to get cars off the main road, because it was a safety issue and it was causing congestion.
Who came up with that idea? Was that you?
Finish time.
Who came up with that idea? Was that you?
Because it was before my.
Oh, right.
It was actually the client who came up with that. It was before my involvement on the project, but it's something we took and developed, and we had to obviously allow for the reallocation of the school traffic to make sure that there was capacity to accommodate it at those times. But that just shows that can be the key, actually, to listen to the locals and try and offer them something. A lot of developers don't or not seen to offer anything, and but sometimes that can be the key to getting a scheme across the line, is to find out what an existing problem is and try and do something to solve it. Gives you some brownie points.
Matthew, what's one thing that perhaps any lesser experienced transport planner, or maybe a graduate or a junior, needs to understand quickly or adapt to excel within transport or development planning?
You obviously need to, the key thing I'd always say is don't stop asking questions, particularly when you're starting out. You're not going to know everything. I don't expect you to know anything. People who don't ask any questions worry me, because I think, do you really understand? Or are you just saying you do because you don't want to, don't want me to think that you don't know everything, but I don't expect you to. There's obviously a lot to master. You need to be, to get up to date or up to speed quite quickly with various sort of standards, policy, technical guidance, etc. There's quite a lot to master. There's a lot to think about in transport planning, in terms of all the things. If you're looking at, for example, a new housing development, you've got to make sure that it complies with all the standard requirements. If it's going to be adopted by the local authority, you've got to make sure that you're catering for vehicles, you're catering for pedestrians, if you've got enough parking, cycle parking, car parking provision, and things like fire access, servicing, all of that. So there's a lot to get your head around, and unfortunately that does take time, because it's probably quite overwhelming. I can't remember myself, but it must be quite overwhelming when you first come out, and there's all these things to try and take on board. But it is easy now, or a lot easier than when I started out, to find things out, because you've got Google and things like that. You can look up information and see maybe what others have done elsewhere, or sometimes just a quick Google search can yield the answer to a problem of what you need to do somewhere. Oh, that's the answer. That's what you've got to do. Right. Okay.
This episode of Practical Perspectives is brought to you by Padaris. Planning, engineering, and stakeholder engagement seamlessly integrated into the cloud. To discover how Padaris is helping the likes of Arup, WSP, and Sistra plan smarter, faster, and more collaboratively, head over to padaris.com/podcast today. Matthew, technical skills aside, how do you recognise a strong transport planner, maybe a committee or local authority, stakeholder meeting, or an employee? What are the signals that stand out for you?
Well, as I said earlier, you've got to know your stuff. You've got to know the technical standards and the guidance as to what's required, what you need to do in order to comply. But you need to be able to convey that in layman's terms, and particularly if you're a planning committee, for example, as you mentioned, because committee members they're not transport planners, they're laymen. And if you're at a public consultation event with engaging with the local community, or if you're giving evidence at a public inquiry or a hearing, you need to be able to convey the technical terminology in a manner that they can understand. For example, if you're talking about 80th percentile speeds, people won't know what 85th percentile means. So you've got to explain that in a way they can understand. So for me, that is key, being able to communicate to a different audience and to know your audience as well. Not just talking in jargon, but being able to converse and explain it to the layman.
Sure. Matthew, you're hugely experienced. You employ, direct and manage a lot of people. Can you maybe share some of the softer skills that I should be learning right now in transport planning? And what other skill sets do you look for when hiring, or maybe you just want to see developed?
Certainly, there's a need to be able to communicate well, and that's very important, to be able to convey ideas and make yourself understood, be able to listen to other people and their ideas, and to be able to share information. That's very important. I think it's a very important soft skill to be able to do that, to listen and think things through. Don't be afraid to collaborate with others and ask, because a group of people can sometimes work together. Something we used to do in the early days of Ardent, certainly when we were a lot fewer of us, we used to 4 or 5 of us would sit around and chat things through and try and come up with a solution by drawing things up on a plan and sort of knock it into shape, and suddenly a solution would emerge through collaborative working, and different people bringing different ideas, and we did this on this scheme here, we did this, and that could work, and that's always something I don't like, sitting in silos and just keep your knowledge to yourself. I like people to share it and you bring their past experiences to solve new problems and work with others.
How often do you meet frustration or even failure? And what have you learned from those experiences, and what can we learn from you?
I have to say, frustration is quite frequent. Sort of time it can take things to get resolved and to get responses and things. Failure less frequent. There haven't been many schemes I've worked on where we've failed to get a permission in the end to get it across the line. There was one. We had a very constrained site we worked on it was in London, and the client was insistent that they wanted to serve. It was a sort of retail scheme. They wanted it serviced by a full-size Arctic, going down these fairly narrow residential streets, which had parked cars on both sides, and arranged a demo run with people, the representative from the council there, because it's been going on for some time trying to get this solution, and they did manage to get this full-size Arctic through, but it was really tight, and and they sent their best driver, and he struggled, but he did it, but he hit it really slowly, and after that the client just said, I'm not going to pursue this anymore, because I'm not 100% convinced we'll get this across the line. We may have had to go to appeal to do it, but I'll never know. But it was a bit frustrating. I still remember that. Some years later now, that got away. That didn't didn't get a solution there.
Yeah. And how does that work then? Do you, when you have other possible sites like that, are you always kind of, recalling your sort of 20 plus years history in transport planning? Are you always kind of cross referring to other schemes and jobs, whether Ardent or before? Do you always kind of, you benchmark those?
I think quite often you're aware of what works somewhere else and think, well, well, we might be able to get that a similar approach here could work. Done that more than one occasion where you apply a previous solution, and different authorities in different parts of countries like different things. In what one authority will allow, another one might not. So you say, oh no, they won't like that here. You can't do that. You've got to do something else. So I mean that's the benefit, I suppose, of having been around a while and worked in various different places and a number of schemes over the years, is that you do pick that up, and that's sort of a bit of a sixth sense sometimes as to what the solution is that will get you the permission that you want.
Yeah, as my old mentor says, there's no shortcutting experience, which I think is crucial. Matthew, I'm going to put you under a bit of pressure here, and ask you to share, maybe a mistake or a huge challenge that you had to overcome. If you're happy to share one or admit one with us, perhaps what have you learned from one or two of those in your own career?
It was more a challenge than a mistake. There's a site we worked on. It was actually pretty much at the start of Ardent. It was one of the very first sites we worked on. It took us about 5 years to get it resolved. That gives you an idea of it was quite painful. But it was a site on the edge of a village, and it had been allocated for development by there was a development corporation there at the time, and they'd allocated it. The local council, which is also the highway authority, weren't very keen on it at all, really, to put it mildly. And we had a number of challenges in getting an access solution. We couldn't access it from the existing residential area because the roads were too narrow and parked up, and there were constraints on land ownership. So we're going to have to access it from the bypass. It was a single carriageway bypass, and something of a white elephant because it had itself been bypassed by a new trunk road, so it wasn't particularly heavily trafficked. There was a footbridge that ran through the middle of the site, which crossed the bypass and rose up from ground level, across the bypass and went back down again. There was a left-in, left-down junction on the bypass serving a leisure centre, which the footbridge also connected up to, and roundabouts at either end of the bypass. So in order to get either to or from the leisure centre, you have to go past the junction and U-turn and turn left, either in or out. So we looked at various options for providing access. Could we get an extra army off one of the roundabouts at one end, because it was quite large? There was potential scope to do that. Instinctively, it was my view that the obvious solution was to put in an at-grade junction with crossing facilities, remove the footbridge, and then it made it much easier to have the one access point to the site. Probably a signal junction with at-grade pedestrian and cycle crossing facilities. That felt to me to be the obvious solution, but the highway officer wasn't very keen on that. To be fair, he did work with us to come up with a solution, and we went out on site, and we drove around, and he said, well, we'll drive up and down the bypass and have a look. And so in his car, and so first of all, he was trying to visualise what an extra arm off the roundabout might look like, and just sort of mock turns into it as we went round the roundabout. And then driving along the bypass, he said, I think I'll just turn right here into the leisure centre, which you're only supposed to turn left into, and supposed to have gone the turned and come back. And he was just glancing in his rearview mirror and said, oh, hang on, I'm not sure if that's a taxi behind me or a police car. I'll best just carry on.
Police
and
car.
We got to the roundabout to U-turn. It was a police car. Good job we didn't do that. So anyway, but he did work with us, and when we looked at so many different options of having two separate junctions either side of the footbridge, and in the end, what we came up with was keeping footbridge, because politically, even though it had been instances of kids throwing bricks at cars off the bridge and everything, but politically there was will the locals wanted it to stay. So we retained it within our design. We had a roundabout, we had a two-cone crossing for pedestrians and cyclists as well, off the bypass, and then we threaded a road where the second carriageway of the bypass would have gone, so where there was sufficient headroom under the footbridge. The urban designers wanted us to reduce the size of the roundabout, so rather than being a large roundabout like the existing ones, it was made to a smaller compact one. So there was sort of some compromise there. So that was the solution, but it took a long time to get there. The client got very frustrated and just we're going round and round in circles, and he can't get access. It's ridiculous, and it was pretty tough. Coming under quite a lot of pressure. The planning consultant on the job stood up for us. He was very, very good and said, "No, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. Don't worry, we'll get there." And we did in the end. But just to confirm, I think that my original solution was probably the right one in terms of getting rid of the bridge. Soon after we finally got our permission, after 5 years, an overheight vehicle struck the footbridge and damaged it, and it had to be closed and repaired eventually at some considerable cost. And the council then said, "Well, actually, we'd not quite like to get rid of the footbridge, so maybe you could go back and replan your development without the footbridge." No, we're not doing that. Sorry, you had your chance. But to me, that sort of vindicated that I was right, and that was the correct solution, really.
Is the footbridge still there?
I believe it is still there, intact, but there is a nice new two-cone crossing as well, so you can use that instead if you prefer. But I think it just seemed the logical solution is to get rid of the U-turn movement, having all movements junction, serving the leisure centre, reducing the U-turning at the roundabouts, providing a better crossing facility, and getting rid of a 1960s really ugly footbridge. But it's, to my knowledge, still there. But that was quite challenging because you were thinking, are we actually going to get this across the line? This is tough. So that still stands out now as one of the tougher assignments that I've worked on.
One of the harder ones, yeah. Hey, what about some lesser known regulations or policy considerations that may significantly impact transport planning and highway design? Maybe share with us. I'm going to ask for 2 or 3 things if I can that not everyone in your position might know or be aware of, but maybe they should be if they're an experienced transport planner. What do you got?
Well, there's various little nuggets. And these are quite nerdy, I'm afraid. But I mean, there's for example, a signal junction. You need to have a separately signalled right turn, so it just runs on its own with the opposing head flow stopped. Whereas speeds are 85th percentile speeds are 45 miles an hour or more. That's something that I think some people don't seem to know. So that's on safety grounds, obviously. And on the subject of speeds, a couple of years ago, the guidance for undertaking speed surveys changed. It's now rather more onerous. And rather than taking a sample of total of 200 vehicles and taking the 80th percentile from that, you now have to take 200 on each day and take the highest 85th from either day. And then in the past, you would use wet weather speeds, which are deemed to be 2.5 miles an hour, far slower than dry speeds on single carriageway roads. You now have to take those the faster dry speeds and apply wet weather deceleration rates rather than using wet weather speeds as you did in the past. So it's got a bit trickier there to provide for sort of accesses and visibility requirements. And there seem to be a few people out there who still don't know about this. Even it's been out.
Do you still pick them up? Do you pick them up from time to time with your staff? Do you kind of peer over their shoulder and no, that's wrong?
Oh, I think I've drummed that into them now because it's one of visibility displays and all that sort of things. One of my pet topics actually, and whether you should use manual for streets or design manual for roads and bridges, the acceleration rates, and reaction times. That's one of my favourite topics of consideration. And another one actually is census data for car ownership, and I didn't actually have to do it in the end, but it was a scheme which had been refused planning on other grounds, and one of them was inadequate car parking, and the consultant who had worked on it originally declined to defend it, said, you can't win this, there's no, I'm not going to do it. So the client was a bit desperate, and someone recommended us to him, and he came to us, and I said, well, I think we might be able to formulate a case here using census data for the local area. Car ownership by dwelling type, tenure, and size. And so, looking at whether it's a house or a flat, looking at whether it's privately owned or owner-occupied or rented, and whether it's and then the size of the dwelling, whether by the number of rooms or bedrooms. And as you might expect, houses tend to have higher car ownership than flats. Owner-occupied tends to be higher than rented, and car ownership tends to increase as the size of the dwelling increases. And by using that data, we managed to formulate an argument that demonstrated that, in fact, we did have enough parking provision. And so from this unwinnable appeal, the week before the inquiry, the council caved in and withdrew that reason. So
I like it. Very clever.
That was a good result.
Yeah, very clever.
My favourites.
Hey, finally,
I still remember
give us some words. That's very good. Give us some words of wisdom or encouragement for our listeners, if you can, before I let you go, that maybe want to take action or advance their career or rise through the ranks, to maybe sit where you're sitting one day. Is there anything you could leave them with before we let you go?
You have to be pretty tenacious. You've got to master your craft, I think, through experience and hard graft. I'm afraid it does involve quite a lot of work and applying yourself. In terms of you've got to know your stuff, and you've got to. And the only way to know your stuff is to do the job. I think for quite some time, and just to gain that experience. Yeah, and it does take a while just to get yourself fully up to speed with everything that you need to know. I still don't know everything, and I never will know everything, but you've got to do that. And collaboration, I think, is important. I think it's important to work with a mix of people. A former colleague of mine said that to me. I remember once about different people bring different things to the table, and I think you need to draw upon that, and different personality types, different skill sets, different approaches. Don't just surround yourself with the same sort of person similar to you. You might have people that you may not get on with that well, but they'll approach it in a different way, and you can learn from that. I'd never be afraid to hire people who might be better than you, because again, you can learn a lot. There might come a point where you'll perhaps be out of your depth in a certain area, and you might need someone else who's really good at a particular skill where you're lacking. So don't be threatened by that. Draw upon that and use that to help you.
Yeah, I really like that. What's next for Matthew Last? Another 18, 20 years at Ardent?
Well, we became an employee-owned company a couple of years ago. So and that's sort of the start of the transition. We've got 100 staff now. So we're something of a transition to very much into a medium-sized company now rather than a small company. And we're sort of starting to think about succession planning and passing it on to the next generation. So and I'm more involved now with the running of the company than the technical work. Still do some technical work. I still intend to carry on doing that for a while. But we're starting to think now about passing it over to the next generation to look after Ardent and to carry on for a lot longer than that, another 18 years, I hope. Me still having some involvement. In the short term, certainly in the short to medium term, I shall still be around. And I shall still be here for a while yet.
Matthew, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you coming and joining us today. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Scott. Very enjoyable.
Thanks for listening. Today's episode of Practical Perspectives has been proudly supported by Padaris, the trusted toolkit empowering transport planners everywhere to plan faster, smarter, and more collaboratively. Experience the future of transport planning today at padaris.com/podcast.